we only have one choice when we vote for president, for congressman, for governor. We have the option to vote for one very flawed person or the other very flawed person.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author, and speaker. My guest today, John Trandem, and his wife Lydia, have crossed my path many times through the years, especially through our area's local pro-life community, for which the two have been actively speaking out on behalf of the preborn child. Christians who practice Lutheranism, the couple and their 3 children have been involved in several local church communities, including Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Fargo and St. John's Lutheran Church in Park Rapids, Minnesota, near their Summer Lake home. Since 2000, John has owned and operated Trandem Automotive Services and TAG Ventures just across the Red River in Moorhead, Minnesota. As a committed Republican, he's also been involved in politics locally, including in his current role as first vice chair of the North Dakota Republican Party. He's also served as the District 45 Republican chairman and as a member of the North Dakota Judicial Conduct Commission and the North Dakota Air Pollution Control Advisory Council. So why did I invite John on the show today? Just after the presidential election in November, I noticed a meme floating around social media. To think that God ordained a filthy-minded, adulterous, wealthy man with evil in his heart to preside over a nation challenges my self-righteous understanding. But he did, and that sinful man by grace gave us the Psalms. #King David. It's not surprising that the meme drew varied reactions, but it struck me because we'd just seen many people hailing one or the other candidate as either Hitler or hero. This election cycle has been an interesting study in human nature, and we're not done yet having conversations about it, by any means. Is there a way to thoughtfully comment and expand on this meme's intention? Most understand that it was a comparison between Donald Trump of today and King David of ancient times. While the Trandems won't meet King David this side of heaven, they did share space with President Trump in January 2017 when they attended his inauguration ceremony. John also met Donald Trump at a rally in Bismarck in 2016 after the North Dakotan was identified by the Associated Press as the delegate who put Trump over the top to clinch the Republican nomination. They met briefly again when the president visited North Dakota in 2018. Much has been made about President Trump's weaknesses in recent years. The question we'll be discussing today isn't whether politicians like Donald Trump are fit for canonization, but whether, like King David of old, God can work through flawed politicians and leaders today. So let's hear what John has to say about it now. So, John, welcome to Matters of Soul Importance. How are you doing this evening?
Very well, Roxanne, and I really, really, truly appreciate the opportunity to spend this time together and have this conversation. It's important and I think very consequential and very timely.
Well, I've thought of you and Lydia. She's so well spoken to, and I know she has her own things to say. But tonight, I have you, and you've come to mind as the political framework has shifted and swirled, and I just so want to have thoughtful conversations, and I feel like we kind of were denied that. It just felt like for a long time it was so hard to break through, and it's still hard. But I want to try tonight. I want to throw some thoughtful things out there. So, but I want to do what I always do and get to know my guest a little bit, especially from the faith perspective. So if you want to share a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and then a little bit about how God entered your life and maybe some key moments of that.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Fargo, in North Fargo. So, and I'm still in North Fargo, and I've been here all my life, very happy here. I love the people. I even love the climate. I love the seasons. So I'm a happy guy in Fargo. So I was raised in the church. I had perfect attendance all through Sunday school. I went to confirmation, was confirmed, and continued to go to church. But there was a point in my faith journey where I didn't go to church for a little while, and it began. It began with a real dissatisfaction with the doctrine of the church I was attending. I was raised it was originally the ALC church, and then it became the ELCA church. And it seemed that over time, as my political identity developed and I became more aware of what was going on around me in the world, particularly with regard to the issue of life, it felt like the church was not keeping up. And there was a time when I walked away from church for a while, unfortunately, and I entered a time of seeking shortly thereafter, and I attended several different churches, different denominations, from Baptist to Pentecostal to evangelical, some of the more charismatic churches. What I did, and this was probably not wise, is I went as far away from where I started as I possibly could because I was dissatisfied with where I was. Over that period, I was invited to participate in a Bible study by former Governor Ed Schaefer, of all people, which was very fortuitous. And through that Bible study, I came to realize a lot of very important things. Number one, I came to realize what I was missing in the churches that I had been attending. I came to realize the importance of strict adherence to Scripture. And it really helped to get me to where I am now. And I'm not saying my journey is over. It certainly isn't. It never ends. But over a long period of time, I ended up here. And right now here feels pretty good. And I'm comfortable here.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, obviously, comfort isn't all we strive for, but it's good to be in a good place. You're a father, and you have three beautiful children, and that's all good. And family is so important, and it's one of the things that we share also, that we want to keep being a strong force in our world, and we're concerned about that as parents. I'm curious about that pro-life piece, and that's kind of how we crossed paths. I think initially, what was going on? Like, what formed that in you? And I'm also curious, like, kind of how old you were when you were going through this kind of crisis of faith where you were really searching.
Yeah, and I could give you very specific answers to those questions too, because this is very easy to remember this time in my life. It was a very interesting period in my life. I was working for an organization that raised money for the Republican Party, telemarketing, believe it or not. I did it, and I really liked it. I liked that job. I liked talking to people and connecting and communicating. I was 20 years old. I had been raised in an environment where everyone was for choice. Now, we didn't entirely understand what that choice meant or the consequences of that choice. All we knew was that choice is good and restricting choice is bad. So we were pro-choice. That was my virtually my entire 370 some member graduating class. We were pro-choice. So fast forward a couple of years, I'm working for raising money for the Republican Party, and we start talking about issues. Newt Gingrich was in office. He was leading the 104th Congress. It was the contract with America as he was negotiating with President Clinton. The life issue came up a lot. And I came to realize that there was a lot more to that choice than I had first understood it to be. And by and by, I resigned myself to becoming pro-life because I felt like that was the right choice. It was the right position. And when you look at basic human rights, and we hear that a lot, basic human rights, what are basic human rights? Well, it doesn't get much more basic than the right to be born and to live and to be able to enjoy that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So that became very foundational for me very quickly. And so began my affiliation, number one, with the Republican Party, because I saw two different divergent paths there, with the Democrat Party going more in the direction that I had come from, and the Republican Party standing up for life. So at that point, as a 20-year-old, I became pro-life. And that pro-life stance is really what spurred me to become more active politically, because I realized that that was where the changes happened. The people that were doing things in politics, that were advocating for candidates and policies. So that's where I went.
I'm curious about your family. You talked about your peers and everyone was pro-choice. What about your family and also politics? Was that anything? How did you come into politics and become interested in the Republican Party at age 20?
So I'm so old, Roxanne, that we didn't talk about politics in my house. So, and the same was really true with life and
Yeah.
issues like that. We just really didn't talk a lot about that. And honest to goodness, I don't know that I could have told you who my parents voted for in those years. I certainly could now, because now we talk about it a lot. Things change.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents are very aligned with my way of thinking, or I'm aligned with their way of thinking. Maybe that's how it came to be. But yeah, at home we didn't talk about abortion. We didn't talk about politics. We didn't talk about who you're going to vote for. It was just one of those things that you didn't bring up.
The other thing I'm curious about is when you made that shift, I mean, you were still pretty young. What do you remember, like exactly what it was, or was it just a process that like you slowly came to the realization, or was there anyone in your life, any incident? I know there were certain things in my life that really punctured a hole in that bubble because I grew up in a Democratic, environment as well. And we kind of, I mean, there were a little bit of talking about it, but my parents were teachers. Everyone was Democrat. It was on the reservation. It was a very heavily Democrat. I shifted for the same reason you did. And I remember some of the specific things. Do you remember any of those points that kind of made you go, whoa, this
Yeah,
isn't right?
I do. And this was, as I said, I was 20 years old. This was 1995. And what it was, honestly, Roxanne, is it was science. And people always want to frame a pro-life perspective as one born of religion and religion alone, only informed by religious dogma. That's not what it was for me. It kind of went the other way around, where I arrived at the point that science had informed my perspective regarding life and the origin and the genesis, the beginning of life, and my politics and honestly my religion followed suit. So it didn't exactly go in the order that it always does. I don't believe, but yeah, that's what it was. It was science, and even in 1995, there was what I would describe as scientific consensus with regard to the condition of the being in question as alive. Even in
Mhm.
1995, I don't think there were people saying it, but those statements didn't withstand even 1995 era scientific scrutiny to say, well, no, this isn't alive. Well, it's clearly alive. It's clearly alive. It's clearly growing. And the only way to arrest the development of that being is to end its life.
Yes, the conversation certainly has devolved, and I think it's the emotional aspect of it has created these mottos and things that people have glommed onto. I mean, there's a whole part of the whole marketing scheme, and we've talked a little bit about that in an earlier podcast, and just how words are used, how our ideas are accepted incrementally, and before we know it, we're proposing something that's illogical in my mind.
Well, and
So,
the entirety of the pro-choice position is built on euphemisms. It's not honest. It's not an honest position. And necessarily so, because if everyone were honest, we would not be advocating the murder of the unborn.
right, right. Yes. And then, of course, I don't know if this happened to you, but when I became a mother, all of that was cemented even further. And when I had a miscarriage, I was already pro life. I was starting to be more active, but that even just like, I feel like God allowed that in a sense for one reason, and that was to help me to see the value of life even more and also to understand the grief of what a woman who loses her child goes through. Even though I haven't experienced abortion, I do know how real that child was and is. And so there's different things that I think bring you further into that mindset and that understanding. I won't even say belief. I believe it's a truth. What were some other things that happened to you along the way to, number one, bring you further into your pro-life activism, I guess I would say. And then beyond that, also to keep you, growing in your Republican activism as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the contributing factors there?
Well, no, I can't relate to you on having become a mother because I'm well, even though this is 2024, soon to be 2025. But
The parent part.
the parent part, without a doubt, and my values were pretty well in place by the time I got married when I was 35 years old. So I wasn't a young fella at the time that I got married. But when Lydia became pregnant and as we were expecting our first Elsie, who's now 13, it became even more real than I ever could have imagined, because you see the baby in the sonogram, the ultrasound, and you feel the baby kicking and moving. And even just my wife's experience, living kind of vicariously through her and experiencing this through the lens of a mother who's pregnant. I'll tell you what, I don't know how anyone, male or female, could go through the process of becoming a parent and not be touched by the miracle that God does when he creates life.
That would be a hard one, and that's one that's so perplexing to us when we are praying at the abortion facility here in our area. When we see parents, when we see the car seat in the back with the toddler, it's hard, and we understand that there's something really compelling going on there, that there's not the kind of support that's needed. At some point, something has broken down. Anyone who arrives at an abortion facility, there's been something that has broken down terribly, and so our hope is that we can, little by little, make changes to help change that. It takes time. So what about politics? What is your hope? Because some people have said that politics, isn't going to solve everything. Where do you fall on that?
No, politics isn't going to solve. Politics solves very little, but it does inform us. It number one, and I would say probably as important as anything, it lets us know where the people we don't agree with are coming from. And I think it's just as important to understand the perspective of those with whom you disagree than to shout into an echo chamber all the time. I learn very little having conversations with people that agree with me about everything. So I think politics is a good way to put ideas on the table. It's a good way to test theories, to put them to the test in the real world. Certainly, economic theory and so forth. That we can get answers when we do that. When we watch and study the free market, as opposed to a restrained market or a government interfering in markets. But I've come to realize that politics in and of itself doesn't really solve anything. People solve problems, and people are informed through the process of political engagement. And it's been just invaluable to me to have conversations, as I said, particularly with people that I don't necessarily agree with, because I learn a lot. And I would honestly say more often than not, I become stronger in my resolve on a particular position when I listen to someone that I disagree with, as opposed to the other way around. Although I'm certainly not above changing my perspective if the facts point me in that direction.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I think of these different conversations I've had, and one of them, again, hearing, well, laws aren't going to solve all of this, and I get that, but I remember a time that was challenged because there was a father, and he had brought his wife in, and there was a child in the back, and it was earlier on when I hadn't had a lot of conversations. I just didn't understand how a father could do that. And so I did dare to ask him, and we had a little bit of a conversation. And ultimately his answer came out as, because it's legal. And I realized, even though I am not a huge, political person, I realized in that moment that a lot of people are kind of basing their morality based on what is legal. And so in that framework, I realized it is important to have laws that, determine some moral choices, because that it is a moral choice.
And legality is interpreted as license for so many people. If it's legal, it's not only okay, it's good. And that's the real folly in this whole conversation with abortion being legal. And I agree, if for no other reason than to let people know this is wrong. We should have laws to that end. Well, look at just for example, look at smoking.
Mm-hmm.
We used to see that as just a normal, average, everyday thing, and we would tolerate it. And I'd go into a restaurant, and there was a smoking section and a non-smoking section. Now, I'm not saying that these are just laws or that these are appropriate laws, but look at the way that people look at smoking right now. People that smoke cigarettes, as long as if it's not marijuana, I should say, that's a whole different story. People that
Then it's
smoke
okay.
yeah, right. Because people that smoke cigarettes are villains now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And why? Because the laws changed, and that informed people's perspective as to the propriety of that particular activity. So, as I said, I'm not saying that's right or wrong or any. We don't need to get into that, but laws absolutely aid the moral imagination. So, when you have a law that says this is wrong, and you get used to that law, pretty soon you're going to say this is wrong. And the same thing should happen with abortion, certainly.
I do like what you said about politics being an entry point for conversation, because if we don't have conversation, obviously we're not going to advance. And so that is so important. And that's a good point. I want you to define conservatism, because we've become so divided and so black and white with our labels. So I think the word conservative, Republican to half of our country, or however you want to split it up, is a bad word. I would like to challenge that a little bit. So I'd like to hear what you think of conservatism, and how you consider yourself a conservative, and why. What makes you that?
Sure. When I look at conservatism, and certainly some of our liberal counterparts would take issue with this, but I look back to the founding of our country. I look back to our founding documents. I look back to what was important to the founders. You think about freedom. You think about free enterprise, limited government, limited spending, the government not doing anything that individuals can do for themselves, or those things that are not specifically enumerated in our founding documents, the protection of basic human rights. I think the word conservative gets a bad rap, and from my perspective, it just means go back to what our founders envisioned for our country, and let's stick to that. Let's stop adding rights, and of all things, adding basic human rights. Everything is a basic human right nowadays. And half, if not 99% of the new basic human rights are rights that necessarily compromise other people's rights. That means that they're not rights at all. But that's what I look to, is what did our founders envision for our country? And from my perspective, they envisioned what I, as a conservative, would embrace.
Well, we just came out of a time where things got pretty heated, and by the time this drops, it'll be January. We're going to be looking towards an inauguration, and the conservative thought, I guess, kind of predominated the recent election, much to a lot of people's surprise. I know that a lot of people are still swirling and frustrated, and as were some of the conservatives 4 years ago, and I know there's a lot of raw emotion going on there. But I want to come to on November 6th, which was the day after our presidential election. You posted something on Facebook that you'd been watching the liberal faction's reaction to the election, and had concluded that you had some conclusions over their confusion over Trump's win. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about your thoughts, if you're willing to kind of step back into the mire a little bit, only because I want to assess it a little bit from a more thoughtful perspective, and not all of the emotion. What were your thoughts that night, and what have been your thoughts since?
So you summed it up with some of the last words you said right there, was all of the emotion. I think that the reaction to what I think anyone could fairly characterize as a red wave was, who are these idiots? Why is everyone so stupid? I heard a million reasons why, particularly Donald Trump won. That was who they were really taking issue with, was Donald Trump. It wasn't someone saying, "Oh my goodness, Kelly Armstrong won as governor in North Dakota." I didn't hear a lot of that. It was
Yeah.
all kind of Trump centric. And what I saw was a complete and total lack of introspection. There was no honest assessment of the candidate, Vice President Harris, her faults, public perception surrounding the candidate who lost. And it seemed like so many people jumped right to more than half of the US voters are idiots. They're racists and they're sexists. They hate women. They're xenophobic. They hate transgender people. They want to close our borders. They want to enslave everyone. It's the Handmaid's Tale all over again. And I thought, the first thing I thought, Roxanne, is I hope I didn't react that way when President Biden was elected. I don't think I did. I didn't even check my Facebook and go back and look, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. I hope there's been a lot of soul searching since I made that post. The rhetoric hasn't cooled off much, maybe a little bit, but it hasn't cooled off much. Now it's been it's transitioned over to President-elect Trump's appointments for his cabinet, and that same level of vitriol seems to be prevailing among the more left-leaning talkers. And I pride myself in having a very diverse set of friends on social media, and I love them all. But it's been really challenging to communicate with them lately.
My husband left Facebook a while back because of this very thing. As a communicator, it's harder for me to do that, but it really was his college friends that were starting to get into these political rants, and he wasn't with them, and it hurt him that he felt like he was, going to lose friendships over politics, which was something they never talked about. And that's one of the things, like you brought up earlier. This wasn't something that divided us in earlier years. It's kind of a new phenomenon, and it's troubling. And I'm wondering, John, do you have any, as a man of faith, you believe in Christ, you believe that He came to free us and to bring us back together through Him, that He is the great unifier. How do we square what's happening, and then how do we somehow bring our faith into this in a way that can be helpful? Do you have any thoughts for that? I'm sure you do. Whether it can play out is another question, but what are your thoughts?
Well, the first statement that comes to mind is that they shall know us by our fruits. We need to live out our faith. We need to communicate in love and compassion. And of all people, I'm certainly guilty of violating that standard. But I think that's what we as Christians need to do, is we need to let people know that we love them. We love them, whether or not we agree with them on the intricacies of politics or even of the pro-life issue. Loving our fellow man is Christ-like, and I believe we are charged with doing that. And I don't know how else we can be effective if we don't start there.
That's right. Yes. Well, I have a question that I started the whole podcast with that we haven't even covered yet, but it also came from a social media post in which a hashtag, a thing about King David was kind of compared to Donald Trump, and I bring it up in the introduction. So my question from that is, can God work through flawed politicians? I think one of the things that took me aback, which I wasn't surprised, but just how much momentum was behind the reactions to President Trump winning the presidency for the second time. So many people focus on his great flaws. So the question is, if you look in the Old Testament, there's a lot of flawed leaders, and here we are in present day as well. Do you think a very flawed politician can bring good? And how do you convince others of that if you believe that?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We only have one choice when we vote for president, for congressman, for governor. We have the option to vote for one very flawed person or the other very flawed person. Uh, I suppose you can break it down into the degree to which an individual is flawed. And I actually had that conversation with someone well, I've had that conversation several times with many different people. One was in an interview with I can't remember. It was a national media source of some sort, and it was Forbes, as a matter of fact. And the interviewer, he thought he had me over a barrel, and he said, "Do you honestly believe that Donald Trump is a good person?" And my answer was, "No. There's no such thing as a good person. None of us are good people. We're all sinful from the get go." And when it comes, and then this goes forward to another conversation I had with an individual, is how can you as a Christian vote for a man who's been divorced and he's cheated on his wife? And my answer was, whose sin concerns me the most above anyone and everyone else? Mine. Chief of sinners though I be. I don't know if you're familiar with that hymn. It's an old Lutheran hymn, but I'm concerned with my sin. I know my sin better than I know Donald Trump's sin, better than I know Roxanne's sin, better than I know anyone else's sin. And it grieves me to consider my own sin, to the point that I'm not about to evaluate anyone else based on the degree of the sin that I think they carry. So the answer is absolutely God can work through flawed individuals and even profoundly flawed individuals like me, and good can come from that. After all, he is God.
Right. And I think my perspective is, well, part of it is how did those of us who didn't like the last election outcome, how have we survived these past 4 years? So let me just ask you that. I assume you weren't happy. You're an active Republican and you're very pro-life. Things didn't work out in 2020. How did you survive through that?
Yeah, Roxanne, that's an opportunity for prayer. It's an opportunity to petition God for what we see as lacking in our society, and that's the only way that we can work through that. I don't know how. I'm not going to beat my head against the wall. I'm going to turn this over to God, and I'm going to trust in His sovereign will, that ultimately it will be done through whomever He chooses. And I have to put my trust back in Him, because if I try to overanalyze this, I will drive myself crazy. So I would say a prayer. I'll kiss my kids and my wife, and thank the Lord for every new day.
I would say, like, these moments of disappointment for those who didn't get what they wanted, and we as Republicans, as conservatives, still have our concerns, and we still need to hold the people in office accountable, and things are still situating, and there's a lot that's going to unfold. But I would say that those that were fearful at the beginning of in 2020, um, some things came true, some didn't. But to live by fear, I would say, is a real danger. And that's one of the things I guess I see happening on the other side. There's a lot of fear. And I know it's a human thing. We all have that. But it's an opportunity for us to go deeper into our faith and to realize that God is above all. And so that's one of the reasons I feel that God can work through flawed individuals, because number one, there's a lot of people surrounding that flawed individual, and there's a lot of different forces that can come into play, and God is he's still in charge. But if you don't believe that, I can see where you could be really caught off guard and kind of, I'm trying to understand the side that's falling apart, because I've seen some real disconcerting responses, and I want to speak into that, speak into hope, by kind of using some of the examples of what we went through when we had to survive the last 4 years. But, well, John, I want to talk a little bit about your encounters with Donald Trump, because you've had a few few times where you've crossed paths with him. And so we will take a little break here, take a little breather. And when we come back, I want to hear more about your first person encounters with Donald Trump, and also to continue to talk about can flawed people, can flawed leaders be vessels for God? And we'll be right back with more Matters of Soul Importance.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. I have John Trandem with me this evening. We're discussing, can God work through flawed politicians? And we know all politicians are flawed, as you just alluded to, John. Nobody is perfect, and some more than others. Some maybe don't have a good sense of. And some are more blunt than others. Let's just put it that way. I mean, if we have to be real, Trump has said some stupid things. I'm trying to, be fair here. He isn't always a likable character. Sometimes he has said things that made me even kind of cringe a bit. I'm sure there's few people that haven't had that experience with Donald Trump, but there's more to it than that. So I am curious, though. You have crossed paths with him a couple times. So I know these aren't like you didn't sit down and have a long conversation, but tell us a little bit about the couple of times that you have been in the presence of him and what your thoughts were.
Yeah, and this is not unique to me, because I've had conversations with a lot of others who have had longer conversations with him, and I've asked if this is typical, because my impression, there were really I've come in contact with him several times. There were really two instances where we actually got to exchange words. I'll say, I won't necessarily say have a conversation, although the first time that I met him, we did. And he's very, very different from his public persona. He was very curious. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Do you have a family? What do you do for work? What do you think about this? It was all questions. So you look at Donald Trump and you see his public persona, and it's all me, and I can do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to fix that, and I'm going to get this guy, and I'm going to lift this guy up. Not at all like that face to face. It was very deferential. He listened a lot more than he talked, and it was very clear that he was actually listening too. So very revealing when you have those close encounters, so to speak, of the person that you're dealing with, as opposed to how everybody sees them publicly.
Right. And you attended his inauguration as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, my wife and I were able to go in 2017. Yes.
I remember seeing some beautiful photos of you all dressed up on that night.
It was beautiful, for sure.
What was that like? That had to, no matter who the president is, that has to be exciting. So what was that journey like? How did you get invited? Did you fly? What was the scene?
So it was funny, because I had no intention of going to the inauguration, but we had as our guests at a pro-life function, Senator John Hoeven and his wife, Mikey. And we were having conversation with them at our table over dinner. And Senator Hoeven said, "John, what can I do for you? What do you need?" He and I have been friends back since 2000, when he first ran for governor. I got to know him. And I just, right out of nowhere, kind of said, "Hey, it'd be kind of cool to go to see the inauguration." And he said, "All right, let me get back to you." And I didn't think much of it. And then all of a sudden, in the mail, in a beautiful package, we got invitations for seats at the inauguration in 2017 for Lydia and I. So at that point, we thought, well, I guess we better go. So we made arrangements, and we flew out to Washington and stayed in Virginia, and we went to some social events that were all part of the inauguration. Very, very neat, very kind of highfalutin stuff, a little bit out of my normal social circle for sure. But it was one of those clubs, those private clubs in Washington where they don't let you take pictures, which
Oh.
I thought, oh, this is really something. But you know what we did? We just took a lot of pictures anyway. But I don't think they can arrest you for photographing others. But
Or
we
taking selfie of you and your wife in your
right.
nice clothes or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we just made the most of it, and that was kind of at the advice of Mikey Hovind. She said, just soak it all in, have fun. This is once in a lifetime. Just do what you want to do and enjoy it. So we did, and it was great. One of the things that really stands out. It's unfortunate that this does stand out, but that was at the time when the protests were. I don't know if I can say at their most vulgar because they seem to outdo themselves every time. But it was awful, just awful. The vulgarity
Mm.
of the attire of the protesters, and you may remember some of the themes of what they were doing out in Washington, D.C. It was horrible. I was embarrassed to have my wife see a lot of the things that we saw, but there was no avoiding it. It was everywhere. So I don't mean to bring the whole conversation down here, but that was a very memorable part of the experience. And whenever we jump on the train or whatever to go from here to there in DC, there were a lot more protesters than there were us. So we had to just kind of blend in and not look like anyone, so no one would pick us out. But otherwise, the experience was incredible. It truly is a once in a lifetime experience. So if you ever have an opportunity to attend an inauguration, sitting out there with the entire Senate, the entire House of Representatives, former presidents, the Supreme Court justices, everyone is there as they swear in the new president. It's a uniquely American experience. And I don't know, for someone that's interested in this kind of stuff, the civics and the pomp and circumstance and politics, doesn't get much better than seeing that inauguration face to face, right up close.
How long were you in DC then for that?
Oh, I think we spent about 5 nights. I think we spent 5 nights there.
Okay.
We did a lot of sightseeing. There's a million things to do in DC, so we tried to do as much of it as we possibly could do in as little time that we had. But it was more of the sightseeing than official events. But there were some official. We went to the ball, the presidential inaugural ball, and we're standing up by the stage watching the Trump family and President Trump and his wife dance and all of that stuff. So it was just a wonderful experience.
Wow, that would be. I mean, it really just kind of like Mikey said, just a once in a lifetime thing for most of us peons out here in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
what have been some other highlights of your time immersed in politics? Would you say?
I'm a real convention guy. I really like the conventions when we get down to business and get stuff done, where we endorse our candidates and so forth. So both at the state and national level, I've served as a delegate to the state conventions in every one since the year 2000. Those happen every 2 years. And then I've attended 5 of the national Republican conventions. And it's just an incredible, it's very different from an inauguration, but it's an incredible experience in that you go to these conventions, even at the state level, and you meet people that you'd never otherwise have an opportunity to meet. In 2016, we had both Ted Cruz and Ben Carson in Fargo, North Dakota, at our convention, and we get to actually sit down and have Q&A and conversations and just informal conversations with them. And then similarly at the national conventions, I've attended 5 of those, and everyone is there. If you want to go meet, here's Chris Wallace is over here, and there's Mika and Joe Scarborough over there, and they're just, and all of the elected officials, the senators and the House of Representatives, everyone is there, and they're right there for you to go up and have conversations with. So you feel as though you can actually be impactful when you attend those events, because you get to have conversations with actual lawmakers face to face, and some of them actually, seem to pay attention to what you're saying.
Yeah, that would be something else. That's great that you've had those experiences, and it all started really from this young age of realizing that life was important to you. How have things changed for you in that regard, and what are some things you're hopeful about and maybe not so hopeful about in terms of the pro-life issue?
Yeah, it's the priorities don't change too much in that at the root of it all, we want to save as many babies as possible. Now, obviously, as a pie in the sky goal, I'd like to not have to save babies anymore. I would like for the consensus of mankind to be that we don't murder our children. But it's very heartening when you see organizations, and you're just as familiar as I am with all of them, particularly lately Women's Care Center that's expanding into Moorhead now, and the reach that they've been able to have. It grows year over year. It grows every year where they're able to see more women. They're able to save more babies. They're able to make it possible for women to make life-affirming decisions that they can live with, that they will never, ever, ever, ever regret. You can say of abortion, you may not regret it, but I would say you probably will. How many women have given their children up for adoption and say, gee, I wish I'd have had an abortion?
Hopefully none. I'm sure there's a few out there, but that would be an unfortunate situation. So life is always, always hopeful, and we need to keep going with that. I do want to come back to this idea of the Bible and how God worked through flawed people in the Bible. Do you have any stories, John, in your time studying the Bible, of examples of how God, other than, I mean, I brought up the King David one, but any others that have been influential on your life, or just inspiring, or give you hope for the future?
Well, sure. I guess if you go back to the Bible itself, the first person that comes to mind to me is the man that gave us the preponderance of text in the New Testament. And he was known originally as Saul of Tarsus, a persecutor, a Pharisee, a terribly, bad man that came to be one of the greatest evangelists in the history of mankind. So from the Bible, that's the example that immediately comes to mind. You talked about that meme with King David, and that's a pretty obvious one too. But I just think in my years of reading and studying the Bible, so much of Paul's work has been so beneficial and so quotable and shareable that what an incredible journey his life was, and God taking occasion to work through him.
I just thought of this line: every sinner has a past and every saint has a future. I think that's how it goes. I hope I didn't flip it around.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at remembering things like that. But the point being, yeah, Saul was very, very flawed and tormented the people of God, and he changed. And I wish those who have put more stock in Donald Trump and whomever they don't like and appreciate right now could see beyond. I think that that's the key for us getting beyond the mire of politics. I don't know about you, but there's just a lot of division right now. And as we're recording this, we're going to jump into the future for the actual drop, but we're just in the Advent season. It's just starting. And
Yes.
one of the things, I heard a beautiful homily at the start of Advent. I was in Bismarck visiting my mom for Thanksgiving, and the priest talked about how a lot of times Advent, has the warm fuzzies, and we're kind of getting ready for this little baby to be born. It's so cute, and he kind of just broke through that and said, I don't want that to be what we focus on this year, because, we'll already be doing those preparations, he said. But I think what we need most of all is to remember that Jesus came into our world to set the captives free. And I wish that for everyone who is captive right now, captive to, a hopelessness, a despair, and not seeing God in the picture, and not trusting and surrendering their lives to that. And my hope so much for 2025 is that more and more people, even if it's through suffering, discover this loving presence that can turn our lives upside down in a good way. And I just think a lot of people are despairing right now, and I want so much for them to be brought to the mercy of God. So I don't know, as you're looking into the future and thinking about your faith, what brings you hope right now?
Well, our only hope is in Christ, and all of those people can be drawn to faith, and that's the work of God. That's not the I'm a Lutheran, so I don't ascribe to any of the decision theology business where we would say maybe that Saul of Tarsus just decided I'm going to be a nice guy, and from there on out he was the workmanship of God. God draws us all to Him. That's His. That's by design what He wishes to do. So my hope is in Christ, is in God drawing these people to Him, and in these people being receptive to being drawn to Him, because that's where it can go off the rails. God can call us, and we can say, I forfeit the call. I'm not interested in it. And I think that probably happens a lot. But I guess my prayer would be that God calls and they receive.
What do you think? And this can be faith, this can be politics. What are you hopeful about? What are some things that you're really looking forward to? You celebrated the night of the election. There were others that were celebrating with you. I want to give you a chance to be excited about what's coming, because I think there are possibly some really good things, even those who are doubters. What are you excited about, John, as we're getting closer to Donald Trump taking office?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting when we look at to me, it's been very heartening when I look at his cabinet, or the methodology behind his cabinet picks. And I won't just say his cabinet picks, because I'm not nuts about all of them either. But we're going to be entering a new and more subversive time, where the status quo would be more Washington insider bureaucrats doing what Washington insider bureaucrats do, and that is to preserve their own power and their own place in the bureaucracy. And I think we're going to see a shift from that to people who actually want to get things done and to leave their mark on this country in a positive way, and not just uphold the status quo. Because whether it's a Republican or a Democrat president, historically, status quo is the winner. And I don't think the status quo is so hot. So I think we're going to see things shaken up a little bit. Sometimes that's going to be good. I hope more often than not. Sometimes it's probably going to prove that maybe it wasn't maybe it wasn't the right direction. But I think it's important to let those things sort themselves out. Whereas in the past, it's just been more of the same with a different stamp at the heading, whether it's the R or the D. And as much as I appreciate so many of the Republican leaders that have gone before President Trump, I don't know that many of them were particularly revolutionaries as Trump is. I would say I'd put Reagan more in that camp, but certainly not through the Bush years. And so I'm just looking forward to things being done differently than they've always have been done. And I think we're going to arrive at some very, very valuable conclusions. And that's whether things are done right or wrong. I think we're going to reach some conclusions about the way things should be done for the benefit of the citizens.
It definitely seems like there's some innovative thinkers coming on board. And I think that's probably a little bit scary for people too. Like you're saying, like we don't really know what's going to happen exactly. But at the same time, I think we can be excited and kind of look at it with curiosity and wonderment. And at the end of the day, we go and we love our families, and the politics isn't everything. It's great that you're involved, and we need to have people that care and are thinking and want to have those conversations and want the world to be a better place and to do it in that way. But at the end of the day, it's us and our families doing the best we can each day. And I think just to focus on that. I don't know. Do you have any other parting thoughts before we let you go, John, or anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
Well, I guess I would just say as a word to the listeners out there, and I'd say this even if Kamala Harris had been elected president. I'd say give the president a chance. Give the president an opportunity. Pray for him or her. I remember historically in my church life, we've always prayed for the president. That doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat president. Pray for your president. Pray for your leaders. If you think something isn't going right, engage and share your perspective on that. But I think above all else, we've got to give our leaders an opportunity to lead and see where it goes, because I don't believe that any of the leaders wish to fail. I think they all endeavor to succeed, and I think they all endeavor to make our country better and our people stronger and more independent. So give them the opportunity to do that before we cut them off at the knees.
And we still are a country that is very much watched by the rest of the world. And it doesn't even seem like this election was just about us at all. It just is, as we are more and more global, it seems like we're like, there's a lot of curiosity from other places and also people depending on us to make some good moral decisions. So I'm hopeful about that. And I know you are too. Are you going to go to this year's inauguration, John?
I don't have plans to go to it. If something happens and I end up doing it, so be it. But I would just as soon let someone who hasn't had an opportunity to go, because there's a limited number of seats available for people to attend that. So I hope people that want to go get an opportunity to. But I'm not going to say I'm not going, but I don't have any plans to go.
Well, thank you so much, John, for taking time to share your thoughts and share a little bit about your experiences. And say hi to Lydia for me. And that was so nice of her. She brought you some tea in our break, which you needed when you're recovering from an illness like I recovered from. So you take care and have a wonderful 2025. There's lots of reason to be hopeful. And I will cross paths, I'm sure, with you on social media, which is one of the places we converge. So God bless you. Take care and have a wonderful 2025.
And likewise, my friend, I appreciate the opportunity. God bless.
You too. Bye-bye. Can God work through flawed politicians? I suspected, even as I was saying the line, every sinner has a past and every saint has a future, that I'd mixed it up. I've always been adept at mixing metaphors, so I'll chalk that one up in the flub category. But I'm kind of glad, because it gives me a chance to circle back and expound on the idea, which relates directly to our topic today. Indeed, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. I've learned that this quote is attributed to writer Oscar Wilde, and its meaning, of course, is that even the most revered humans have made mistakes, and the least admired can be redeemed. This is a thoroughly Christian idea, I'd say, this idea of redemption and how it is possible and accessible to everyone. It's the whole point of Christ's presence in our world, this idea that no one is beyond his grace. God is the initiator of grace, and we choose whether to respond. Countless lives have been changed through saying yes to grace, and the best stories are those that have involved that deep and beautiful transformation. Honestly, I come back to the day last summer when President Trump missed being assassinated by a mere movement of his head. Was it divine intervention? I'd say it's possible. Do I think that means he's a saint? No, but I do believe that God prevented an evil plot from taking place, and it's possible that Donald Trump has reviewed that moment and came a little closer to God that day than he was the day before. In fact, he's as much said so. But redemption isn't an idea our culture embraces. Instead, we live in a cancel culture in which one mistake can lead to dismissal, doxing, and discarding. Let's add a third D. It is destructive. The cancel mentality leaves no room for hope, not only for the person who's made a mistake, but for all of us. If grace isn't possible for one, it's not possible for any. And if there's no grace, there's no hope. I choose to denounce that idea. I choose to believe in grace and in people's great capacity to change with God's help. Do we give more power to politicians than the Prince of Peace? Maybe it's time to reevaluate our emphasis on that point. It's something to ponder anyway. Who is your Lord? In our next episode, we'll consider the neurodivergent among us and ask, what gifts do the neurodivergent bring to God's kingdom? Until then, don't lose sight of the light.